Okay, the teachings for this week come from chapter 13, The Path to Happiness. And it starts with the verse, ill-being, the causes of ill-being, and the end of ill-being, the path, are also not separate self-entities. And in this chapter, the Four Noble Truths and their interbeing are addressed. The first Noble Truth states that there is ill-being and suffering. Thich Nhat Hann teaches that when we look deeply into our suffering, we see the causes and the conditions that have brought our suffering to be. And when we see the roots of our suffering, understanding is born, and we suffer less right away. He also says, in our suffering, we can see our mother, our father, and our ancestors, and the way in which that suffering has come to us. The second Noble Truth points to the causes of ill-being. He says, looking deeply, we can see the food that is feeding our suffering. There is suffering, and if the suffering continues, it is because we feed it. And this is a profound thing, I thought, to contemplate. And so I'm going to take us on a little side journey here of thoughts that came to me. When I got to this, what I felt Thich Nhat Hann was implying is that the ways in which we feed our suffering are often formed by our parents and grandparents and are unconsciously passed to us long after the original moment of suffering took place. And so I kind of took a break with that thought from studying and writing notes. And I picked up a book that had just come to me in the mail. It's a memoir by C.J. Hauser. And I found myself laughing out loud at the humorous way in which she was wrestling with this phenomena of having inherited ways of feeding suffering and not knowing the source. And so I wanted to share a couple of her, I found them humorous quotes. She said, I want to learn from what went wrong in the past, but sometimes it seems everything worth knowing is redacted. As if ignorance is the only thing that allows each successive generation to tumble into love, however briefly, and spawn the next. And then she went on to say, I find, with humor that there's also a revelation that's happening. And so going from Thich Nhat Hann to her, there was like this thread of revelation. And she said, she was looking at her Irish heritage, and she says, my mother keeps a scrap of paper taped to her diary, a quote from Yeats that reads, being Irish, he had an abiding sense of tragedy, which sustained him through temporary periods of joy. And the first time I read that line, it hummed over my mind like a diviner's stick. And I just wanted, this brought me to realize that catching a flicker of truth, which reveals a chronic pattern of how we feed our suffering, is always a gift. It is a moment of divination. And I also wanted to share that I studied to become a birth educator and doula with a woman who had a Buddhist practice. And she taught us that, yes, giving birth hurts, and women do not need to add suffering to that pain. She taught mindfulness techniques as a way to quiet the mind during labor so that women could endure the pain without adding suffering to it. And I found her distinction between pain and suffering profound. Many things in life hurt: accidents, illness, loss, humiliation. But so often it is the story that we put on a painful experience which generates and perpetuates our suffering. And I think these can be the pieces that come to us through our lineage. And one time when I was at a birthing from within training, a midwife came and she had just been at a birth. And she told the story at the beginning that the woman she had assisted had moaned all the way through a long labor, "Why me, God? Why me?" And hearing this brought comic relief to our group of birth workers. And though we all have like deep respect for birthing women and whatever mantra carries them through labor, there was something that we all needed to laugh about. And there was a revelation inside of what this birthing woman had captured in her moaning. And where it took me was that we were all unconsciously familiar with the biblical story of Eve being responsible for the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. And as a result of her behavior, women had to now suffer pain in childbirth. And you know, so that's an unnamed piece that we were all wrestling with. And I'm grateful to that birthing mother, for I can now catch myself in moments of wanting to unconsciously feed the archetype of woman as fallen and in need of punishment when I feel the pull to feel victimized by life or by God. And then I'll just catch it and I'll go, "Oh, why me, God? Why me?" And then I can laugh. And it's like an interruption to the suffering. So anyway, there are joyful ways that we can do this work. And the living aspects of our practice certainly establish joy. So returning to the other shore, the third noble truth states, the truth of ill-being will reveal the end of ill-being. The cessation of suffering is the presence of happiness. And Thich Nhat Hann emphasizes that happiness is possible right in the present moment. And the fourth noble truth says, if there is happiness, there must be a path leading to happiness. Thich Nhat Hann takes particular care to clarify this noble truth. He begins with pointing out that in the more traditional translation of the Heart Sutra, there is the phrase, no ill-being, no cause of ill-being, no end of ill-being, and no path. And he says many people have understood this line to mean that there is a place where there's absolutely no suffering, a place of perfect and uninterrupted happiness. And I reflected on that. I went, well, that's what I call heaven, you know? And I was certainly taught to believe in such a place. So as I said, you know, these teachings are like giving me a lot to consider. And it made me actually wonder if my ideas and the formation, like the whole formation of the idea of heaven, of our imagination, it brought me to just question, is heaven, in the way that we think about it sometimes, actually one of the unconscious formations we use to feed our suffering? And I guess that question came up for me because it makes earthly life in contrast to such, you know, such uninterrupted happiness. It makes earthly life become like this blanket of shame and place of condemnation, which adds suffering to the painful experiences that we actually grow through. in life. So these were just considerations that came to me. And I was thinking, like this whole path of thinking about earthly life as not where heaven is can often lead us to think, well, why haven't my efforts created a perfect life? Why is there still suffering? Why me, God? Why me? That whole. So Thich Nhat Hann says that although we can touch a place in our consciousness that is beyond happiness and suffering, this does not mean the non-existence of happiness and suffering. As long as there are human beings and human mind, happiness and suffering will continue to manifest. Well, that's a big one to contemplate. So I just put it there. I'm sure we'll have good discussion after. And then Thich Nhat Hann goes on to clarify, in the light of interbeing, rather than saying the path leading to suffering or the path leading to happiness, we say that there is a path of suffering and a path of happiness. Imagining there is a path leading to an end result reveals dualistic thinking. We imagine a very long path full of thorns and suffering and hardship. And I was thinking, well, that's kind of how many of us were taught to think about life on earth, which eventually leads to happiness and peace, which is what I was taught to think about as heaven. So that was just kind of interesting to think about. He says, in this way of thinking, the path and happiness are two separate things. So for as long as we are on the path, we cannot be happy. We have to wait until the end of the path to have happiness. But he says the truth is that the path to happiness is happiness itself. The Noble Eightfold Path is not a path, it is a way in which in every moment there can be happiness, there can be peace. And this made me really reflect on hearing Joanna Macy speak about the reason she was drawn into Buddhism. She and her husband, when they were young, had gone to Dharamsala to help receive Tibetan people as they fled the Chinese invasion. And Joanna was endlessly taken by the happiness the Tibetans were able to have in life, even as they were immersed in the pain of loss and hardship. And that she said she had to find out what was in these people's lives, what was in these teachings. And Thich Nhat Hann goes on to say, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. The process that gives rise to peace has to also be peace. So we say there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. And then in the end of this chapter, Thich Nhat Hann further challenges the formation of heaven, many of us have and do hold to. And he says, going even further, we see that happiness and suffering depend on each other to manifest. Happiness cannot be possible without suffering. It is only against the background of suffering that you can recognize happiness. Good and bad, suffering and happiness, ill-being and well-being are not separate entities. Each has to base itself on the other to manifest. The Four Noble Truths are